And we're joined now by the former Shadow Home Secretary, David Davis. Welcome back to the Sunday Politics. If you got judicial review as part of this process now for new surveillance powers, would that about do it for you?
Almost, yeah. I mean, there's a sort of new consensus. It's not judicial review, it's judicial authorisation.
I beg your pardon.
Very important.
Another matter. Yeah. Authorisation of warrants by judge, not politician.
Yeah, that's 9/10 of the way there. I mean, the simple truth is we've got too much surveillance in all sorts of areas because actually there's not a proper constraint and not a proper check. And if we got that, I think I'd probably largely lose interest in the area because it's no longer a real threat to our liberties.
What about your attitude towards what I was speaking to with Keir Starmer, because it was briefed out from the Home Office, of a two-tier approach, an initial warrant to find out what sort of websites I'm looking at, what sort of stuff I'm doing on my iPad or whatever. That comes from the Home Office. But to dig down, to get into the content of what I've been doing, that needs a judge.
Now, the best guidance on this is the independent reviewer of terrorism legislation, David Anderson, who did a very strong report on this. And what he said essentially is it's got to be independent and it's got to be, well, ideally judicially overseen, but got to be independent. So it can't be the policeman in the office next door or a spook in the office next door, and it can't be the Home Secretary. It's got to be somebody independent. If you do that, then you don't need two-tier systems. You have a uniform approach to everything.
But aren't politicians more accountable than judges?
No. Look, every time I've asked a question of any minister on a security matter, even what law did you do this under, they say we never comment on security matters. There is no accountability. I mean, when the various, look at the distinction between us and America. After 9/11, there were clearly errors in the intelligence handling which might have stopped it if they hadn't happened. The head of the CIA went. After 7/7, there were also clearly problems. We knew about these terrorists, we just didn't follow up on them because we had too much else to do. Nobody paid a price for that. They shouldn't have done, in my view, but they didn't pay a price for it. And we take a very soft approach to this. Ministers are not really accountable for this. If they were answering questions in Parliament about it, responding, it would be different, but they're not.
But they may not be accountable enough, but many people will think they're more accountable than judges, who we don't know, who have jobs for life. I mean, one minister quoted this week says judicial oversight of interception warrants is a bad idea. Well, he didn't mean oversight, he meant judicial authorization of interception warrants is a bad idea, because he said, who is held accountable if a bomb gets through because the judge refused to sign a warrant?
Well, as I just said, nobody, in truth. There's a much better way of doing it. And again, Anderson points this out, and Rusi to some extent, the two of the most important reports on this. And that is, you have a proper oversight procedure as well. It backs up things. So you've got judges that do it, a single panel, not 3 or 4 different
then look in retrospect at what
they look in retrospect at everything that's done before or after any errors. You know, they find them and then fine-tune the system. The aim at the end of the day is to protect the public. That's the main aim. At the moment, the Home Secretary does about 10 of these warrants a day. You know, a working day. It's impossible for any one person to do this. It's bad practice, it's bad managerially, it's bad legally, and it's bad in terms of counter-terrorism.
Now, people who take your view, they often quote our allies, Canada, Australia, the United States, the Five Eyes countries, New Zealand too. They have judicial authorization of warrants. But I mean, I was looking at the figures. US judges approved 99.66% of all warrants. Yeah. In the end, it makes no difference.
Well, if
warrants are given.
Well, warrants are given, but and actually the US judges have been pulled up on this, of course, and they've actually been tightened up. They've now got somebody in there to put the other case. They didn't have that before. But the simple truth is that if you've got a decent system, you don't take a bad warrant to them. You don't go to them with the expectation of being turned down. You make absolutely sure you've got the right person, the right basis. And so the percentage doesn't tell you much.
If you don't get judicial authorization, will you go challenge this bill in the courts as you did the last bill?
No, because the last one was because it went through the Commons in one day, which was just a ridiculous thing. And I thought, it's not been properly tested, so let's test it elsewhere. I broadly believe Parliament's a better test than the court if it's allowed to do the job. Actually, I don't think this bill will get through either Commons or Lords without judicial authorisation.
Right, so even if the government comes out without it this week, it's going to have to change again.
It won't. There's a new consensus on this right across the board, across the experts, across the spooks, across the parties, and across both houses of Parliament.
Let's turn to Europe. The Prime Minister consistently claims that he rules nothing out. But isn't it the case that by rubbishing the Norwegian option, as he did last week, it's pretty clear he is determined to stay in?
Well, look, it's fairly plain that he wants to get an outcome to his negotiation. Whether it's going to be good enough or not, we'll maybe come back to. But he wants to get an outcome which allows him to come back and say, "I recommend." That's been apparent from the beginning. The raw truth is, attacking the Norwegian option is sort of irrelevant. I mean, we're a much bigger country than Norway. We're bigger than Switzerland. We're going to get a better deal with either of them. So they're sort of irrelevant arguments, really. But yeah, sure, he wants to be able to negotiate to stay in.
But the EU is in crisis. Many people, again, on your side say, look, a British exit, it's such a crisis at the moment that a British exit could be a catalyst for the whole demise of the EU project. So why doesn't the Prime Minister make much tougher demands as the price for staying in? It would be a catastrophe if Europe was to lose us at the moment.
He's caught in a conundrum. The conundrum is this: if he makes I mean, I broadly would agree with that argument. I would say you should make extremely tough demands. Tell the British public it's a negotiation. You're not going to get everything, but we'll come back and put the outcome to you. The trouble is, I think the analysis the Prime Minister approached this with was any failure to achieve a complete success would be used as a weapon to beat him with, and therefore he was going to aim lower in the hope he'd get 100% success for what he aims at. I think it's a wrong analysis, in truth. I think the high bar with an acceptance you don't get everything would have been the smarter approach.
Like a trade union leader, you go in asking for £5 a week more, and you settle for £4 or £3.50.
Exactly. I mean, when I negotiated with the union, we tried to get tough demands, and we didn't get everything, because we were outnumbered. 14 to 1, now 26 to 1, I think, whatever, 27 to 1. So of course you don't get everything. But here, for the very reason you say, Europe is no longer in a position, in a strong position. Its primary experiment, euro, is in a terrible state, and therefore we've got the stronger arguments.
Isn't it inevitable, though, even given that when we finally get to know what the Prime Minister is asking for in some detail, and we may get that by the time of the summit in December, isn't it just the blunt truth that a huge chunk of your party, maybe most of it, is going to be deeply disappointed by the paucity of his demands? No,
I don't think so. I mean, I think the truth of the matter is that everybody's got conditioned to the fact that the demands will be not the sort of substantive constitutional changes that some of us wanted, and people therefore are beginning to shake their position to the stance they take. One of the things about this, however, is that unlike, let's say, Maastricht, there is the option of the referendum. They've got that option to exercise, and they will try and get a resolution that way. And so that will actually pacify the thing from some point of view.
Let me come to tax credits. Should the Chancellor, should Mr. Osborne tweak his tax credit plan to make it more acceptable, or should he, in effect, junk it and go back to the drawing board?
Well, I mean, two things. He needs to achieve a reform of the tax credit system. It's a very bad system. It's just too expensive for what it does. And he also needs to achieve fiscal balance or better by 2020. Those two things are absolute requirements, really. But what he doesn't need to do is do it all next year. And that's really the issue. Along with Frank Field, I sponsored a debate on Thursday in the Commons. It got amazing uniformity across the House. And what came out of that was a simple feeling, look, whatever you do, so long as it doesn't penalise the working poor, particularly with dependents, then we'll go with it. That was really the argument that came back. And that's the criterion.
So that's more than a tweak.
That's more than a tweak. It's a lot more than a tweak. I mean, the simple truth is, look, if you are a single parent working, raising 2 kids, you can lose at the moment up to £2,000. You actually can't afford to lose a pound, So what we've got to do is, as you say, a lot more than a tweak, but a staged way of doing this. Getting to the same place in 2020 is good enough.
Taking longer.
And the financial markets will actually accept that. They will say it's the end game that matters, not the stages on the way.
David Davis, thank you for being with us
today.